Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Before I introduce the amazing Frances Moore Lappe, I want to talk a little bit about some sobering news with the jobs numbers that came out today. The unemployment rate in the United States is now nearly 15%, and that's, sort of nearing Great Depression rates of unemployment. And I was reading that 60% of the jobs that have been lost, over the last several weeks are in food. So we're talking about food service, we're talking about retail, we're talking about food processors. This is I think a lot of us have forgotten over the last several years that the food industry makes up such a huge part of our economy. And we've talked about this many times so far in the live cast over the last several weeks, how important the workers who work in the food system are. It's farmers, it's food farm laborers, it's the people who drive for Uber Eats, it's wait staff, it's cooks, it's dishwashers. It's the people who are driving trucks and stocking shelves. These people are more than essential. They have really fueled our economy, and they have been looked down upon for too long. And so we really need, I feel like I'm saying this over and over again, but we really need to make sure that this crisis, that after it's over, things don't go back to normal for those folks, that they're paid a living wage, and that we support organizations like One Fair Wage. You can find more information at onefairwage.com, that we support restaurant nonprofits that are working to keep restaurants alive in this country. So save restaurants.org. You can go to the James Beard Relief Fund, which is working to keep restaurants up and running and during this time. And just this week, Senator Kamala Harris, and Chef Jose Andres announced the FEED Act, which means FEMA Empowering Essential Deliveries. This is an act to keep restaurants in business and to keep workers working at those restaurants and feed those in need. So call your congressperson, call your senator if you're interested in supporting the FEED Act. Jose Andres is a hero, and he deserves your support, like so many people who work in food service are. I think I'll end there, but these numbers about unemployment are very sobering, and we should all be thinking about those who are less fortunate than ourselves, and try to help as much as possible. It's my great honor to have with us today food and agriculture expert, author, and advocate Frances Moore Lappe. She wrote the best-selling book Diet for a Small Planet in 1971, which changed how people view the relationship between their food choices and the environment. She continues to challenge current issues in the food system while focusing on spreading living democracy at her nonprofit, the Small Planet Institute. She has authored about 20 books, including World Hunger, 10 Myths, Hope's Edge, which she co-authored with her amazing daughter, Anna Lappe, and Daring Democracy, Igniting Power, Meaning, and Connection for the America We Want, with she co-authored with Adam Eichen. She currently serves as the director of the Small Planet Institute, which again is a nonprofit really aimed at spreading living democracy and improving our food system. I just have to get gushy because every time I talk to her, see her, I do this. But anyone who knows me knows that Frankie Lappe changed my life. And it's really not, I'm not saying this flippantly. When I was a teenager, I found a copy of her book, Diet for a Small Planet. And I remember sitting in my room reading that book and just, sort of having my mind blown, because she wrote about the impacts of our diet on the environment and social justice in a way that really, really spoke to me, and reminded me, or I learned from her, that eating was really a political act. And that's why I decided to become interested in food and agriculture. So you are responsible for me, Frances Moore Lappe, just as much as my mom is, in creating what I've become, because I really, you're the two most influential women in my life. I remember being starstruck when I first met her in the early 2000s at a Small Planet Institute fundraiser, a Small Planet Fund fundraiser. And it still amazes me that I can call her a friend and a colleague after all these years. It's a dream come true, and I'm not being trite. It's really, I can't believe I know you to this day. So I think I'm feeling especially nostalgic during this pandemic. It's brought up a lot of, good memories for me, and so you're definitely one of them. So thank you for being with me today, Frankie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Danny. Yeah, I've had the same effect about it's a time to reflect and to really feel the gratitude for the people in our lives. And you are, for me, also one person who I feel so grateful for. And that, we are a community and we are supporting one another and inspiring one another. That is just the great gift.
It is a great gift. So I want to dig right in. Diet for a Small Planet turns 50 next year.
It
And you
does.
wrote this at such a pivotal moment in your life. And I'm wondering, from 50 years ago till today, what are the biggest changes you've seen among consumers around the way that we eat and the way we interact with food?
Well, it is the classic. We're moving in two directions at once. One is so much more to a world that really nourishes all of us in every way. And one is that we are destroying the very roots of the soil and water and seed diversity and insect world we need to grow food. So it's really that time of big choices.
Yeah,
And so I'm wowed by both, the power of both. I mean, on the positive, I could never have imagined that, that Diet for a Small Planet all these years later would be understood that, yes, a plant-centered diet, what I call now a plant and planet-centered diet, to bring
right,
in the quality of climate change and restoring the earth, regenerative agriculture, that word is spreading. And I think just in my own little world in Cambridge, where there were no restaurants 20 years ago that really centered in the plant world, and now they're just in walking distance, easy walking distance from my office, there are 4.
wow,
And so there is this big change. On the other hand, we know that globally and here in the US also, that for non-communicable diseases that cause, the majority of deaths every year, that most of them are diet related. And
right,
the way I think of it is with the monopoly controlled food system of corporate processing and a global advertising network, that we see calories and nutrition parting ways. We see,
right.
we used to think, oh, you get enough calories, you're okay. But no, I just want to tell you a little conversation piece that I had with a doctor in rural India who said that 20 years ago, all of his patients were deficient in calories. Now
Right,
they all have enough calories, but 60% are suffering from diabetes and heart
right,
conditions. And these are very poor people. And when Anna and I traveled through rural India, I'll never forget this image. We were way in the countryside, and there were these stands of eucalyptus trees with Pepsi ads painted on the
right.
trunks of the trees. And I thought, oh, 2 invasive species in once, the invasive eucalyptus and the invasive Pepsi, because the networks of people there growing regenerative agriculture were making us these delicious natural drinks of mango and lychee and all of that.
Right.
But they were being overtaken. So I guess that's the biggest shock of um, seeing this parting of the ways of
Right.
nutrition and calories that is so frightening to all of us, and the disease connection. So it's this both and world, and that's really where I'm trying to live right now, is to hold all of that at once.
Yeah, I feel similar, feelings to that. I think one of the things that I've been most concerned about since COVID-19 hit is that I felt like we were making a lot of progress and getting away from all of that focus on calories and focusing more on really nourishing people. You could see, organizations like the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization sort of taking notice and
Yeah,
focusing more on nutrition, which was, a huge thing for them. And
yeah,
now
I
I
mean,
feel like
agroecology, right?
absolutely,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely. And I feel like we're going to go so far backwards now. It's all going to be about quantity over quality. And, I'm really worried about that because, you know, we're seeing already COVID-19 hit places that are already suffering from so much, whether we're talking about sub-Saharan Africa or India, like you mentioned before. And so I don't know how we convince governments and policymakers and farmers and food producers that we still need to focus on nutrition during this time, because the best way to fight COVID, or one of the best ways to fight COVID, is to be healthy and not to have those
Right.
diet related diseases you talked about.
Absolutely.
Any advice for how we reach the decision makers?
Well, I think that the evidence now is supporting everything we said, that the people who, everybody says that a huge risk factor for COVID is, COVID really hurting hard is diabetes.
Right,
And certainly that is, we are way above the world average in that. And so I think we have an even stronger case today that our overall healthy diet is absolutely essential to coming out of this and to protecting
yeah,
ourselves in the future. So that, I think, is a real, and the other, and related to that, and I know you're sensitive to because it's so connected and so real, is that the extreme inequalities in this country and the way that poor people are being so hurt, and they're the ones losing these jobs, being most devastated by this.
absolutely.
And most Americans think that, oh, we're not as good as Western Europe in terms of our inequalities, but actually our inequality index is worse than in about 100 countries. We are more extreme inequality. So we are the outliers, in all the industrial world. And I think the more we can say this is a moment to wake up and
Right.
I've been using this metaphor that we're at the edge and we
Hmm.
either pull back from the edge, we fall over the edge,
Right.
or we see the new horizon. And
Right.
the new horizon is this better world. And that's why I'm hoping that the Green New Deal, with focused on how do we actually address the climate crisis as we address the inequality crisis and the terrible pollution, again, that so affects low-income people of color who are so affected by fossil fuel pollution. And so it's back to that connectedness that I felt so much when I was writing Diet for a Small Planet. And I thought, oh, every bite I take connects me,
Right.
And I'm hoping and doing everything I can to help people make those connections.
Absolutely. And we need them now more than ever. You've said that it's not too late for a living democracy. What defines a living democracy? And what would that look like in the United States? And what would that look like, in Malawi?
Well, the core idea is the same, whether it's Malawi or the United States. And it's been a theme throughout our history. John Adams had a beautiful statement way back as a founder, that our republic is not for the interest of a few or a class or one person, but for all of us. And Franklin Roosevelt said, the liberty of democracy is not safe if the people
Right.
tolerate the growth of private power to the point that it is stronger than the democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. That's what FDR told us. So I think the key to a living democracy is where we listened to these voices throughout our history telling us that we have to step up. We have to step up, all of us, to get money out of the driver's seat, to get
Yeah.
private interest out. And
Right.
fortunately, 4 years ago, I marched in a march that changed my life. I marched from Philadelphia to Washington as part of Democracy Spring, and realized that there truly is across the country a movement of movements, so that we in the food movement can say, oh, wait, I don't have to give up the food movement to be part of the democracy movement.
Right. Right.
And I remember the moment I called Mike Brune at Sierra Club, and I was so embarrassed because I was going to say, Mike, that you can do your environmental stuff and be part of it. He said, Frankie, I'm already doing that. I'm a founder of Democracy Initiative, which is this organization that's a movement of movement. And I said, oh, thanks, Mike. You're ahead of me. But the point is that, that the mother of all issues is whether the people's voice, our common sense, our common interest, whether they prevail. And
Right.
now we have a government by the few, for the few. And so we see environmental legislations pulled back. We see food stamps threatened. All the things that we care about are under attack.
Right.
So I just, to all of us who are participating in this call, I just think like that. Oh, one lovely person told me once, Frankie, you can love two children at once. And I said, oh yeah, I got two. I can do that. So I can love my food movement and I can love my democracy movement. And so we at Small Planet Institute are working with Democracy Initiative and about to launch a soft launch within the next few weeks of something that's just democracymovement.us, democracymovement.us. And you can just go there and see what's happening at your state. You can get the whole picture and you can connect and do that. It doesn't, I don't know, it just showing up for that particular rally or march and weighing in with your representatives and key votes, like for ranked choice voting is very important right now more than ever. Mail-in balloting, making
Right.
that legal in more places. There are these key issues that they're not rocket science, but they increase the voice of all of us. So I think it's that living in that loving two children at once world. And so that democracy, I often say that I grew up, I didn't grow up this way actually with my parents, but, I think culturally we get the idea, oh, democracy, yeah, that's that boring spinach. I love spinach, but anyway, the boring spinach we eat to get what we really want, our dessert, of personal liberty. But actually, I've so shifted in that living democracy is being fully human. It's a feeling connected to others. It's feeling we have a voice. It's feeling our lives have meaning, for God's sake. So that's what we all want. That's not the blah thing that we force down to get our little dessert. That's
right.
The heart of the meal, right?
Absolutely.
So I guess that's my new, working to create the rest of my life. I'm 76. I feel like I've got a lot to go yet.
You do.
And that's really what I've learned, that it's not, we can't make that choice one or the other, that we've got to understand the mother of all issues is our mother. And we've got to be addressing that and speaking up about that while we attend to these very specific issues about the rights of, as you began in your wonderful introduction, the rights of the Food Chain Workers Alliance. Then I've been particularly touched. I'm sure you've heard these stories about what farm workers are doing now, undocumented workers, and they have, no rights, and yet, they are essential to us. And so we've got to persevere. So all of that is what very long-winded answer to living democracy.
No. And you brought up so many important points. And, one of the things that I know strikes both you and Anna Lappe, who is an amazing food advocate in her own right.
I agree.
Around, there's been this idea or this question of whether there is a food movement in the United States and if it can become a political force. And I think there's no greater time than now for that to really come to fruition. And it's because it's, movements of movements, or a movement of movements, as you described, that will help facilitate that. Because I think people are fed up, and they want something new. And I think this crisis for the better, not the worse, has really exposed all of these fundamental flaws and cracks, and not just our broken food system, but our broken economic system.
Exactly. And it's all connected. That is the big takeaway from Diet for a Small Planet. And I love to quote my hero, Hans-Peter Durer, who said, Frankie, he's now no longer with us. He's a German physicist. He said, Frankie, there are no parts. There are only participants in this world we live in, from the cell level to beyond. And so if we're all so connected, then I often like to say, the only choice we don't have is whether to change the world. Because every choice we do and don't make changes the world. That some ripples, if we're all connected, then somebody's watching, even if it's only us watching ourselves, and we know that we're either going for it and being bold, or we're shrinking back. those create then more ripples. So I really feel like that sense of empowerment, of recognizing that food, especially because it links us all, it links us to the earth. It links us, of course, to our own health, that
Right.
it is such a powerful, beautiful tool. Did you know that the word companion, do you know what the root is?
No.
With food, with
Oh,
bread.
that's great. That's great. Well, of course, companion.
Of
I get
course.
it. That's
Right.
great.
Yeah. So, the breaking of bread, that's always brought us together to open our hearts to one another. And I think the food movement's moment is now, where through food and we can feel more connected, and with those who, like, we've been so touchingly grateful to our nurses. And I
Right.
think we can open our hearts to our food supply um, providers at this time also, and feel that dependence. Our lives depend on them. And
Absolutely.
so I think that this could be very much that time.
Yeah, I think we're on the precipice of something very great here, despite all of the, I mean, 3,000 people are dying from this disease every day. It's a really critical time to, as you mentioned, reflect and see how to go forward through all of the fog and all of the turbulence and all of the pain. Yeah, one thing that I enjoy so much about you and watching you speak, when you seem so positive and you seem so full of energy, and you mentioned your age, but I think you've always embodied this sense of positivity in the face of all this, in the face of a US administration that seems not to care about people, that doesn't seem to care about
Right.
anyone but themselves. And how do you keep that positivity up? I've been having a really hard time with that
Yeah.
lately. Our whole mission is stories of hope and success in the food system, and I'm having a hard time being hopeful.
Well, I don't know when this frame occurred to me and it became who I am, but I realized that when I was writing Eco Mind and really focused so much on what is an ecological worldview, that we live in a state not of stasis, but of continuous change in which we're all connected, and therefore we're all co-creators. And in such a world, it really is impossible to know what is possible until we try. And so the great thing about being an elder, now I can look back in my life and see the things that happened that I would never have predicted, that have greatly shaped me. I mean, I
Right.
grew up in Texas with Lyndon Johnson, I saw as an all-out racist. And then about 11 years later, I was working in the war on poverty because his administration was paying my salary to go door to door
Right.
in African American communities and organize the welfare rights organization. Go figure, So
Sure.
if my parents had said during the McCarthy era that their daughter 11 years later were going to be doing that, they would have said no, 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 no. So I think it really helps that to keep this frame of you don't have to be an optimist. All you do is keep a sense of possibility. And I claim that throughout human existence, to achieve what seemed to be impossible, human beings do not need certainty. And we don't even need high probability of success.
Yeah.
We just need a sense of possibility, because our nature, we are problem solvers. We're not, just couch potatoes. We wouldn't have gotten to where we are as a dominant species, right?
Absolutely.
We love to solve problems. And so, I argue that we have this deep need beyond the physical for a sense of connection and power and meaning in our lives. And that keeps me in the sense of possibility, that fundamentally democracy is not a stretch. It's who we are. And
Right.
it's suicide rates being so high is because we're denying people their nature.
Right.
Their nature is to be part of something that is meaningful with others. And so that's what keeps me going, is not feeling like I have to worry about being optimistic. And my daughter Anna and I, one of our early slogans after we came back from our trip around the world, where we talked to the people who were like facing much greater odds than we here. And we looked at each other and said, wait a minute, why are they so hopeful? And so we said to each other, oh, hope is not something you find in evidence. It's what you become in action with others.
Yeah.
And I
It's
think that's the
amazing.
thing about the food movement, that the more we feel that we're doing something, the more that sustains us.
Absolutely. We've been getting some great comments online. People are watching from Oregon, from London. There was a from Ecuador, where I'm seeing now, where we also had a question from someone who was trained, a nutritionist who was trained by Joan Gussow,
Oh,
about
really?
how, yes, and I don't remember her name. If you can put it up again,
Yeah.
Bernie, that would be great. So it's Michelle O'Freed, and she said 250,000 families work together to eat responsibly, linking agroecological production to all of us who eat. I'm a public health nutritionist. Joan Gussow trained me. So can you talk a little bit, Frankie, about agroecology? You mentioned, seed diversity at the beginning of this conversation. How does agroecology sort of, bring everything that we're talking about together, and why is it so important?
Well, thank you. And Joan Gussow, she was the first legitimate nutritionist who gave Diet for a Small Planet a yes.
It's
I knew
great.
I hadn't goofed up. So she's a wonderful role in my life. I adore her. So agroecology is simply lining our farming practices with what the earth can sustain, and it enriches our bodies because we're not being hurt by pesticides. I just saw the figure that the UN says that every year 200,000 people die from pesticide exposure. So there's a good plus right there, because
Right.
you start aligning with nature so that you are building the soil and using natural processes of the insects
Hmm.
world and animal world to keep the pest under control. And so it's really working in alignment with nature, and it can be as productive as corporate chemical agriculture,
Absolutely.
and certainly more profitable for farmers because they don't have all those huge costs, especially in the global south, that just the poorest of the poor can't afford. And so learning these techniques for how to create healthy food without being dependent on corporate suppliers is life-saving. And I think that's and to really recognize is that right now we are destroying the agricultural, whether it be soil. I've read estimates that we only have 60 more years of healthy
Right.
topsoil, and our water, we overuse and pollute our water that we need for agriculture. So it's conscious of all of that, as well
Absolutely.
as, the health of farm workers, because they're not being exposed to chemicals. So I always tell people when they buy organic, remember, it's not just for their bodies, but it's for the farm workers as well, and everybody along the way, and all the animals
Absolutely.
and creatures that you're helping by that. So I really, and my particular excitement these days is about agroforestry, which is
Hmm.
it's a part of agroecology, but it includes trees in the mix. And until, I don't know when it dawned on me and I started really getting acquainted with it, but I always thought that trees and crops would be in competition. But
Hmm.
actually, they're great complements, because the trees help hold the soil, and the trees often can have leaves that have nutrients, nitrogen in particular, that
Right.
fertilize the soils and keep the soils cooler in hot climates. And so that's another huge discovery that is transforming many parts of the world, including the poorest country in the world, Niger,
Right.
where they have transformed 12 million acres, or more than that now, well more than that. And, from the poorest of the poor farmers, just integrating trees and sharing what
Right.
they know with each other. So it's not just another way of doing farming. It's empowering farmers to work together, share lessons, and not be dependent on corporate monopolies. So I'm sure I've
Absolutely.
forgotten something really important. Oh, by the way, in the process, I think many of your listeners may have heard that a prediction of an insect apocalypse happening, that 40% of insects are threatened with extinction, and
Right.
that's horrific for our planet. And so agroecology that relies on natural regenerative forces and not uh, deadly pesticides, that is a way to save insect species as well.
Absolutely. I wish people would get worked up about, this insect apocalypse that you mentioned, as much as they are about these murderous hornets that seem to be invading the US. I mean, if people paid as much attention to, agroecology and protecting, beneficial insects and those kinds of things, we'd have, I think, a lot more going forward instead of going back.
Definitely. And I've started not trying to not, I don't know, even the flies in my house, sometimes I feel apologetic now when I'm
Me
killing.
too. Yeah. I try to put them outside.
Yeah,
I'm
trying to put them outside.
I'm so glad that you mentioned, and you always have the role of small farmers, and what they're learning and what they're sharing with one another. And I think we forget that corporate agriculture, it's not big companies that are feeding the world. It's about 70% of the world's food is grown by small scale farmers. They are feeding all of us, whether we want to believe it or not. Those are just the facts. And so it's an important, especially during this time, to remember that those small farmers need our support, whether they're in Niger, coming up with these amazing agroforestry practices, or if they're outside of the DC metropolitan area where I live. It's farmers are crucial. They're the backbone of society.
Absolutely. And one of the things I'm delighted about here in the greater Boston area is there's now a group called Misfit Markets, and they bring to your door foods that would have been left in the fields as not pretty enough, eggplants that are too small. I kind
Right.
of like little eggplants. But
Right.
anyway, I just love that because we know now that food waste, I know you know this, Danny, but if food waste were a country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter.
Right.
It's so incredible. So I think that's another piece of it, is helping small farmers find markets for things that don't quite fit the supermarket image of the perfect food.
Right, right. And we spoke to Dana Gunders, a food waste expert with Refed, a few weeks ago, and she said that this year we will likely have more food waste than we've ever had before.
Uh,
And I felt it's another issue where I felt like we were making so many strides. People were more
yeah,
aware of food waste than ever. But when you have farmers who, through no fault of their own, are forced to dump milk, or turn crops back into the soil because there's no market for them because of our distribution. It's never been a question of how much you taught me this. Never been a question of how much food we produce. It's always
right.
been a question of distribution, and it's a question
Thank
of
you.
democracy.
Yep. Yeah, I used to say, I mean, one of my little lines is, we have no scarcity of food. We have a huge scarcity of democracy.
Right,
And, the other way I like to put it is that because of the rules that we've allowed to be created that so uh, deny people their right to food is that we end up, no matter how much we create, excuse me, no matter how much we grow, we end up creating the experience of scarcity. And
right,
that's what just hit me like the proverbial, yeah,
yeah,
when I was 26, that wait a minute, they're saying there's not enough, but we are actively creating scarcity. And today, I don't know if you're aware, but in the last few years, the number of calorie deficient people has been going up, even
right,
as our overall grain supply has kept growing. So
absolutely.
it's just so ready to be corrected by all of us.
Absolutely. We spoke to a nutritionist in Kenya earlier this week who's working with people who are part of the informal economy. They're growing food in vertical gardens, these stack gardens. I'm
Yeah,
sure you've seen them in places like
yeah,
Kibera with Anna. And she was talking about this paradox of hunger and obesity in her community, and sometimes even in the same family. And I think there's this sort of misconception that if you look like you're well nourished, if you look like you're overweight, that you actually are getting enough of the right nutrients and calories.
exactly.
And that is just not the case. We have created a food system that, as Raj Patel likes to say, stuffs and starves people at the same time. So, how do we what are your thoughts on how we break that paradox? How do we make sure that people are understanding that they need to nourish themselves rather than filling themselves up?
Well, for me, just the awakening to, my own, that it was, rather than I know you agree that wagging our fingers and saying, oh, you don't get it, that's never going to work.
Right.
But I think that when people, as we communicate with anyone, to underscore that this is our own empowerment, that we have a choice. That was what was so exciting to me when I realized that I could walk into a supermarket and I wasn't just the victim of advertising, that I really was learning what was best for me and then experimenting. And instead of a you should, you've got to change your diet from a meat-centered diet, it was like,
Right.
oh, look at all these worlds of food, of
Right.
discovery. And I think the more that we make it that invitation to discover what this world of plant foods that is so diverse and so, flavorful, and
Right.
then make it possible for people to access it. I mean, it's really this great invitation to just turn food. For me, it was always a threat. Food was kind of like, I was always trying to lose weight, and I was a classic female of the Texas growing up, and
Sure.
appearance and everything. And then suddenly when I went to a plant-centered diet, my weight, I never looked at the scales again because it just
Sure.
all worked, that.
Right.
And if we can communicate that, not as a you should, but oh, it just feels so good to eat this great,
You
great.
can instead of you should. Yeah.
Yeah, we can. And I think that just the more we send those, the beauty of food and the honoring of food, not the you're bad because you're eating junk food. But it is just and freedom from being a victim of advertising. I was just
Right.
reading that in Mexico, I just couldn't believe this, but I read that um, uh, on average, a Mexican person there in Mexico drinks well more than 1 8-ounce can of soda every
Wow.
day. And that, of course, that relates to not having clean water supplies,
Right.
I'm sure. And rather than judging it to say, oh my God, that is a crisis, that is a public health crisis, and how can we encourage something else? And by the way, in Mexico, the new president is putting forth a very
Right.
important agroecology program that
Yeah.
so thrills me. Quite a number of farmers are going to be encouraged, and with some help of dollars, to move away from chemicals to agroecology. It's very exciting.
It is very exciting. You argued in Diet for a Small Planet for this idea of environmental vegetarianism. And I wonder, it must be both exciting and sort of, I don't know how, I've been a vegetarian since I was 13 years old. So it's, there's been this proliferation, as you mentioned, of plant-centered and plant-forward restaurants. But now we have things like Beyond Meat and
Yeah.
the Impossible Burger. And I just wonder what you think about these are, meat-like products that are not meat, but they're also very processed and, maybe not for the vegetarians in the world, but to help, carnivores or omnivores eat less meat. Well, I just wonder what you think about them.
Well, you can imagine I'm not thrilled. I my frame is that who's in control, who's profiting, how much energy and greenhouse gases are used to create these things.
Right,
And so that's the lens I look through. And I don't really see that they don't appeal to me. I mean, I love a plant-centered diet, period. And
right,
I love being able to make meals with just from things coming out of the ground. That's so satisfying. So, I think that, again, it's not wagging my finger, but like, why? Why would you choose
right.
something that is corporate controlled, highly processed, dependent on crops that we know are terrible for the environment, that use, the most toxic pesticide,
Sure.
glyphosate, which now I understand there could be 50,000 to 100,000 farmers who are engaged in lawsuits against
Right, right,
the company that produces that. So why would we want to expose ourselves again to create that system that so endangers farmers and endangers the earth? So I just I just love being able to create meals from the food coming out of the ground, and
right.
it's so liberating. It's so liberating.
Absolutely. And there's this misconception that it takes a lot of time. That is not always the case. It's certainly not more expensive. That's a myth as well. I'm glad you brought up this idea of, asking the question when we're talking about anything, whether it's a technology or a new food, who's in control? Who has the power over it? And I don't think we ask that question enough. And we just sort of assume, well, oh, farmers are getting the money for that
Right.
food, or someone else is, who we support. But that's just not always the case.
Right. So, the more that we can support organic and cooperatives,
Yeah,
you can imagine, because my democracy, a theme song of my life, that I love cooperatives because that's a form of economic democracy.
right,
So I've been very close with Organic Valley and have tried to support any other cooperative that I can find that's genuine.
right,
So I think that's another way of expressing our values, and also shopping in food cooperatives, retail, whenever we can. That's another instance.
sure,
So I think just that lens of who, that we have power with every dollar we
right,
spend. It's going to somebody, and
right.
to really value, to figure out ways that we can support in this time. People, you opened with the various ways that we can help support food workers, and I would say also, food and farm workers. I know you would include those. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I remember Anna and I, when she was 11 years old, we went to a farm workers encampment in Ohio. And I'll never forget sitting at the table with a farm worker who was dying of cancer. And her children were playing in the yard. And she talked to Anna, age 11, and me. And she looked at us, and, um, and with not bitterness, but she said, "I don't understand. Why don't you respect us? We bring you your food."
Right,
And just looked us in the eyes, and it was heartbreaking, because it wasn't vindictive. I mean, it wasn't angry. It was just
sure.
lack of, how could it be? What could be
Right,
more important than food, right? Nothing,
right.
just about nothing. Um, and so I think the more that we realize that we're all connected with people like that young woman who was dying, and I assume from exposure to pesticides.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of voting with your fork is more important than ever because of that woman and all of the farmers and farm workers who are suffering because of exposure to toxic chemicals, and because we don't want that kind of food system. Nobody could look at that woman or hear these stories and say, oh yeah, that's the kind of food system I want, one that destroys people's health and their livelihoods. I want to give
And
you a
our own
chance.
sustainability into the future. I
Absolutely,
mean,
absolutely.
it's yeah, yes, in the present and for our children.
Absolutely. I want to give you a chance to talk about your fourth coming book. It's Not Too Late. It offers a lot of hope, which is what we expect from you. Can you tell us a little bit about it? It's coming out later this year, right?
Yeah, I'm going to do this this world that we're in now. It's a very short book, and um, I'm going to publish it as a PDF. So please,
Nice.
if you're not connected to our website, smallplanet.org, you can and find out about it. It's not too late. Subtitle is Crisis, Opportunity, and the Power of Hope. And in 4 short chapters, we look at the big picture about, yes, it is too late for certain things, but it's not too late for the worst in terms of climate change. And then we tell stories of actually I call them the rules, the frames that cities and states are taking, that are making a real difference already in lowering
Right.
greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's stories from agriculture, but also largely, cities and states and what they're doing that are really working. Like there's a consortium of 10 northeastern states that just since '09 have cut greenhouse gas emissions by almost half. And
Wow.
so we
That's
talk
impressive.
about this, and then at the end, of course, I have to connect it to democracy. So I'm going to publish it as a PDF for your comments. So I want people to give me feedback, and then so much will have to be said after the election. So I want to go back to it
Sure.
in early 2021, and then publish it as a book. So I would really love anybody listening to this to help me with it and tell me stories that I've haven't heard about that would be good for the book or critique or anything.
That's amazing. So again, smallplanet.org. What a creative and innovative way to write a book. It's truly democratic. I love it.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It'll be a much
Um,
better book.
I know you had a lot of events planned this year, and I'm hoping some of them still happen. So I know on November 1st that you were to, I know you still will, but hopefully in person, will receive an honorary degree from Indiana University and give a lecture and the keynote address at the Beyond Boundaries conference. So I hope that still happens, and I know you have other things planned this year. Um, Next year, as we said at the outset, is the 50th anniversary of Diet for a Small Planet, and you're planning a lot of events and a reissuing of the book then. All right, can you give us any sort of nibbles of what's new in the book or something exciting you want us to know about it?
Well, right now, I really need everybody's help because we are asking, mainly through social media, we're asking people who've used the book and scribbled in it and made their own versions to send us their tweaks and ideas. And every time I make recipes, I always change things. So, things that that would be fun. And then anything that we use, we would credit that person on the page in the book. So
Very
please,
cool.
if you've used any of the, or go now and try some of the recipes and see what you think and make them better or make them to your taste, and we'll test them out ourselves. And so that's happening. My daughter will write a chapter in the book just about her experience of growing
I
up as
love
the
it.
daughter of, with the Diet for a Small Planet testing in the kitchen. And then I'm writing a new intro about what I've learned in these 50 years. So it should be a really, really fun year for me, certainly, to be out there talking putting it all together over where we've been. I'm just so thrilled that I can publish the 50th anniversary. It's
It's
almost unbelievable.
amazing. It is. It's really amazing. So again, go to smallplanet.org. You can check out where to find their social media feeds, but we will also have them available at foodtank.com. Go to democracymovement.us,
Oh,
right,
that's
Frankie?
not up yet,
That's
unfortunately.
not up yet? Okay.
That's still in the works, but I would say within the next month or so, we're going to do a soft launch. So if you just let's scribble down that democracymovement.us or come to our website, and in about a month, that will be. We'd love feedback on that because we're going to do it as a soft launch for feedback, but it's going to have a map on it. So whatever state you're in, you can click on that map and connect with the democracy movement, and you can love two children at once.
I love it. I love it. My last question for you is who is inspiring you the most right now, Frankie, in the midst of this terrible pandemic? Who's inspiring you?
Well, my daughter always inspires me. I hope that is always true. I mean, I know that's always true for me, and I hope that's okay to
Oh, of
thank
course. She
my
inspires me
Anna
too. So.
Lappe, my force of nature that I'm so fortunate to have given birth to. I, I read that you were going to ask me that, and I was really struggling. There's just so many people who I've learned from the democracy movement in particular, um, that that just keep on keeping on. And I I I'm at a loss sort of for words here to pick out people that I'll just talk to you about a person from history that
Sure.
I've been totally moved by over this pandemic lockdown period. I watched the movie Harriet. Everyone must watch the movie
Yes.
Harriet. Harriet Tubman, and she was the bravest person I have ever encountered. And it's a powerful movie. And if we can watch that movie and just pick up a tiny bit of that courage, because that's what we need now. Adam Eichen and I, at the end of Daring Democracy, we say, the world we live in today, goodness is not enough. Courage is required. We
Right.
have to do what we thought we could not do. Just being good citizens is not enough. We have to be
Right.
brave citizens.
Right.
And so that's the spirit that moves me right now. It's the Harriet Tubman spirit.
I love
and
it.
all people then who have worked against the oppression, especially people of color that we have put down and put down and put down. And I am just overwhelmed by their courage.
That's amazing. We all need to be brave. Thank you for reminding us. I am so honored you could join me today, Frankie. A reminder that this episode will also appear on Food Tank's podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe wherever you listen. And so sorry. It's just, I love Frankie Lappe so much, and you're such an inspiration. Please join me for our next episode when I'll be talking to Gwen Cokes, the food and farm manager at Civic Works in Baltimore, who provides my local CSA every week and who I'm just adore. So thank you so much, Frankie. You please stay well.
My great pleasure, Danny. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.